All right, good morning everyone. Welcome to our session. We're gonna get started right away. So today we have a power panel of amazing women. And just so you know, we did not plan our outfits. Apparently we all wore some sort of blue color, coming from the colorblind guy. So I tried to do a little pop of color that I can't even see. But anyhow, first on our panel we have, and this is not in order, alphabetical, we're not doing it Hollywood style, is Sarah Dooley Durant. She's the Associate Director of Consumer Marketing at Alchemies. I'm also a Boston native. She's based in Boston. She has been awarded top 25 DTC marketer in 2019. She also has both agency and creative experience. Her original background is in creative for sure. I'm trying not to give you my back. And she's worked with lots of consumer and healthcare professional brands, over 20 different brands over the course of her career. We're excited to have her on our panel, so welcome, good morning. We also have, hailing from Philadelphia here, our home city here, we have Linda Hutchins, who we're thrilled to add to our panel from Epsilon. Linda also has agency background as well as sales side in the healthcare industry. She spent over 20 years in the business, and a pleasure to have her also on the panel. So good morning, Linda. We also have another Philadelphia area person. This is kind of a theme, right? Chrissy Begley, Associate Director from AstraZeneca, also both agency client experience. She currently leads media strategy at AstraZeneca across their CVRM brands. That applause is for a different session, just so you know, so please hold off. And she has more than a decade of media experience, which is super exciting. Also hailing from Chicago, obviously not Philadelphia, so welcome to our city. We have Lisa Johnson. She's the Chief Revenue Officer at DeepIntent. Lots of experience on the ad tech side, great experience from previously gigs at Trade Desk, Integral Science, and whatnot. She's the CRO, so we welcome her to the panel. So thank you so much, Lisa, for being here. And last but not least, we have Stephanie Douglas. She leads omni-channel marketing at Sanofi. She too has both client and agency experience, and we're thrilled to have her on the panel. She currently leads all of Sanofi's general medicines divisions, for things such as their type 1 diabetes, transplant, and established products portfolio. Lots of rich experience both in and outside the industry, so thank you and good morning, Stephanie. I always say there's only 6 people in this business, 6 degrees of separation, so somehow across this panel we all have either worked at the same companies, different companies, know the same people, so this was really fun as we prepped. So we're gonna dive in a bunch of themes today. Sorry that I'm at the lectern. We're just rolling with it. So we're going to talk about different things. So why don't we start today? I'm going to look at this as a question for the whole panel. I'm going to give a little bit of a side here. So we're going to start talking about the new media landscape. I don't even know how new it is, but it's always evolving. It's always dynamic, for sure. So why don't we start with Linda on the panel. If you could each tell us, in your experience, what is the state of the state in this ever-changing consumer consumption behavior? What trends are you seeing in the consumption? How is channel planning? All the fun stuff we love, great time of year, very relevant. Channel planning, budget allocations, how are they evolved in the current marketplace?
Well, I think...
No pressure.
No pressure, right? First one out. So really the emerging landscape that we're seeing is a higher dedication to data, helping our clients capture first-party data that then becomes a primary influence into their media planning, ultimately driving measurement and insights. But really the beginning is data, understanding who you're talking to, and getting a much deeper understanding, really looking at the patient as a person, so much beyond their name and their email address, maybe what their indication is or their ailment is, but really who they are as a person and how they're traveling in the digital landscape is the most important trend that we're seeing.
Chrissy, what do you think?
Sure. I think that really the expectations of customers are changing with the introduction of so many different on-demand type platforms. The expectation is I'm going to consume the content I want, where I want, when I want, whenever. And so that's taking a lot of the traditional walls of our different channels and mediums and breaking them down, and we have to adapt. But really, as long as the customer is staying at the center of how we look at our media touch points, it really just gives us more tools by which to address them.
Awesome. Lisa, so you may have a different perspective being on the ad tech, technology platform side. I know data, it's like a 4-letter word, literally. What's your perspective on this?
So I agree on both. I think what's really exciting though is, as we all know, how people consume media has changed a lot. COVID drove an acceleration towards CTV, other mediums in ways that we just didn't expect. But what I think is really, really exciting is the ability to how we buy that media and being able to work in a platform programmatically that allows you to be able to optimize time. What are the signals that we can now pull in? So when we think about putting the customer at the center and how do we break down silos, to me what's exciting is there's all these opportunities about putting that intelligence together in a way that allows you to optimize sooner and drive better outcomes. Because that's ultimately what we're here to do, is reach our patients, get them relevant messaging sooner, faster, so that they can make decisions that are important to their health.
Stephanie, what do you think?
So
Agree?
yeah.
Disagree? No pressure.
To build on what everyone is saying, I think that it's also how fragmented this space is. And people are sitting on their couches and they're watching the TV, the linear TV screen, but then they're also on their phones and maybe watching multiple different video experiences if they're on social or if they're, whatever that experience may be. How do we break through to them across those different channels and plan our mix and our reach and our frequency to those patients to break through?
Right. Thank you. Sarah, what do you think? What are you seeing at Alchemist?
I think what we really need to think about too is everything that my wonderful panel has actually touched on. It's the data. It's who are you trying to reach? Where are they? How can you reach them? How can you reach them with the message that they need at that time and that they're expecting in a way? And the sophistication and the synergy that is existing now and continually developing is giving us more and more opportunity to do that, all supported by the data so we can do it better again tomorrow.
Awesome. That's really interesting that you all have these shared different experiences. I like that what you just touched on, a couple of you talked about, I think with Stephanie, about the multi-screen viewing. We're everywhere and nowhere at the same time, like very distracted, if you will. So that also changes the dynamics of what's happening for the audiences that we're all trying to engage with, when we're putting out media out into the world. So the other thing that comes up a lot with the new media landscape is we always get talked about like what's the MROI or the ROI and how are we optimizing, and so there's a huge we're going to touch on this theme in a little bit more data focus, but how does that all play into the current marketing ecosystem, like in your experience? Like what are you seeing in terms of this now diverse media consumption diet, viewing behaviors, if you will, or how people are taking it in? How is that showing up on the back end in terms of performance with ROI? And you don't have to go deep into specifics, but if you could touch on that. Why don't we go in reverse? We'll start with you, Sarah.
It's always a learning phase in the beginning. You go with your best plan and everything, and you get all of your data in, and then it's managing that balance, understanding where you're getting the higher ROI, where you have the better opportunity, and seeing where you can push and pull on each of these different levers to further sophisticate what it is that you're doing. It's not necessarily going to be that you want to allocate everything to your highest ROI, because then we'd just all be doing SEM. There's more to it than that, and understanding which of those different pivot points that you have for your audience is going to influence where you want to direct those dollars. So it's not necessarily always going to be the ROI that you're going to go for, particularly depending on what it is that your ultimate goal is. If you're going for awareness, your ROIs might initially be low, but that's part of the overall journey of what your audience is going through. So it's being able to look at everything across the full landscape and understanding what you define as good at that time is ultimately the bigger driver than just the ROI.
So a little pivot on, I want to pick up on something you said and send it to Stephanie. So that sounds amazing, right? Because that's the nirvana state that we all hope for, but there's also disparities in the data and what we can report on. So I'm thinking back to these back-end reports where oh, this looks so great, and XYZ channels are driving the business, but then there's 3 other channels not measured. So Stephanie, are you seeing things like that where you don't have full visibility into that North Star report that you have to tell management, here's what's driving our business, here's what's sort of one nugget of information, making some informed decisions?
Yes, and I think that's where building a concrete measurement plan really comes into effect, and you have to establish, what are those leading indicators with maybe other historical channels that you have measured, and what is that benchmark that I'm going to set for myself? Because marketing mix is only going to happen once or twice a year if you're lucky. So you need to make sure that at least setting those initial leading indicators that tend to lead to conversion as that metric of success.
What do you think, Lisa?
So I agree, but I also think that there is so much opportunity ahead of us because there are platforms that allow you to pull in real-time signals, right? Real-time optimizations, provide back real-time intelligence and insights that informs those investments. And so, yes, there is, the media mix modeling and the slow, I've heard that a lot, right? It's just slow, but at the same time, digitally, it doesn't have to be, right? So really evaluating the platforms and understand there are a lot of real-time. Time is the most important thing that we can do to drive performance, right? Go ahead. Were you going to say something? I was going to say,
you
so
finish,
it's like,
then I'll ask.
so I agree, but at the same time, I think that there's an enormous amount of opportunity ahead of us as we think about that platforms that can activate and drive more real-time responses. It allows you, again, digitally, to have flexibility, to make better investment decisions, right? Drive the change that you want to see because of how it's now transacted.
Right. Can we peel the onion a little bit on that too? So totally love what you're saying and agree, but so in with the RX lens, not real time is could be real-time engagement versus real-time scripts, right? Because on all these products, there's a whole sales cycle, if you will, before it actually gets script written, purchased, brought, picked
Patient
up,
starts,
injected, or if it's
right.
injectable or what have you. So how do you, in your seat, partner with brands and clients to help sort of leverage what is at their fingertips now, and it's sort of cast that net, okay, here's what we're seeing now. We think this could be scripts or what have you.
Sure.
Because it's not such real time, at least not for most products or many people.
So I swear this question wasn't planned, but at the same time, I think
Hey,
a lot of what we
questions.
do is, really that's our special sauce because we are unique in the fact that we take claims data on a real-time basis and marry that with identity and media. So yes, there's typically a 90-day lag as you think about how a patient gets on script. But once you hit that, right, how do we start to make investments and report back on a real-time basis? That's what we do. That is why we drive so much value back to our advertisers because we focus on the metrics that matter, right? RX, everything you said, patient starts, audience quality, right? We're not here for the vanity metrics that, a lot of platforms, CTR, great, there's a correlation, but there's so much more that can now be done, particularly when you work with platforms that specialize within health, using that time component and then the data that feeds into it.
Yes. What do you think, Chrissy?
I agree. I think what's really important too is that we establish what each channel is meant to be doing for us up front at the beginning of a campaign. A lot of us are going through annual planning. We're kicking off annual planning right now, so I'm sure this is very top of mind. But while ROI may be the ultimate measure of our performance at large, not every channel is designed to generate ROI on its own, and that's okay. But then that gives us a framework that we can take into the year. I would just build on some of what Stephanie was saying around, I think it's really important that we have those leading indicators, and then we'll hear a lot in reports. We can't compare apples and oranges. So this channel and that channel we can't make comparisons. And I think that that's very fair. But at the end of the day, when I go to the grocery store, I do not have to buy apples and oranges. I can buy 3 types of apples. So things change during our year on a regular basis. We're constantly hitting disruption. Goals change, landscapes change. So going back to that mix, do we need all the same channels to function in the way we originally intended them to do? Those leading indicators gives us that ability to make those adjustments in between some of those lagged metrics.
And I think some of it too is also the mix of what's the right consumer journey, right? Again, data when it lives in a platform. So is it video? Is it out of home? What is that mix? And so what's again such an opportunity is using that data to understand what that right mix is to reach the consumer in the moment when they're most likely to engage, to do the call to action that you're trying to reach, whether it's awareness, down to something that might be more DR focused.
Yeah. What's interesting too, I'm
I was
coming
just
to you
gonna-
next.
Okay, go ahead.
What I want, we just said something that made me think about this, Lisa, is too about journeys. So there's a lot of discussion at different companies about what's the patient journey, what's the process, and it's interesting because it's there's a million different journeys. It's one-to-one, my journey is different than your journey, and everyone in this room has a different journey, so it's not so oh, let's do a slide about the journey, because everyone's is different. So what are you seeing from Epsilon?
Yeah, so I'm very optimistic. I think the fact that we're focused on data and really leaning into an identity solution, a very, very strong people-based, person-based identity solution is really the secret thread that ties it all together. It enables you to really intersect the CRM for your known audiences, your first-party data, and also all your unknowns, all those that are out there that you're trying to intersect with in CTV and online video and all of the mechanisms that you can pull. But without a strong identity system, you're just sort of, out there. You don't have the connection back into all of the other touch points that really creates that seamless journey. So you can talk to me and you can know me back in that awareness stage, all the way through to when I raise my hand, I let you know who I am, I register with you, and then hopefully, ultimately, I become a very adherent patient. But that identity platform is really where the next level and that seamless and much more timely measurement is going to live.
You just described the perfect patient, right?
Exactly.
They hit all stages of the
Isn't that
funnel,
what
and now
we're all
they're on
looking
drug
for?
and adherent to the therapy. We love it. That's great. So let's pivot a little bit and hang our hats on data. So this is where it's led us, which makes sense as planned. And so we hear a lot about data, 3P, 1P, LALs, all these different things, clean rooms. There's so much going on in this space, and it's the usable data. I don't know if you can hear me. The usable data. So the question for the panel here is, how does your team distinguish between data and insights? Because anyone that has been on a brand team usually is used to seeing data regurgitated, and there's what they are called insights, but they're not insights. It's just like data, and they're telling you what they saw, but not like, aha, here's the golden nugget that we have an insight that then drives a change in strategy or drives a change in optimization, excuse me. Tell me what you're seeing with that.
Yeah, I think it's a difference between, information versus knowledge, right? Really digging in and understanding what the data is telling you and leaning on your partners to bring perhaps additional data sets to the table, the real world data. Maybe there's additional data like, major databases that we can support you with that really gives you more of an insight as to who those individuals are and what are they really telling you in terms of their behavior. Can you predict who's going to be the most adherent patient versus who is not, and what are those potential breakpoints that you can anticipate? And this is where we start to bleed into some more modernized use of data in terms of being predictive in analytics, but in this sense is the bottom line, knowledge versus information.
What do you think, Chrissy? What are you seeing at AstraZeneca or in your experience?
Yeah, I think we're very focused on bringing the data together so that it's one story. Kind of gone are the days where you had a website report and a social report and all these different channels together where you're looking at front end and back end metrics and outcome metrics separately. What's the end-to-end narrative? And then as far as the difference between an insight and just what are we seeing in the data, I think that really depends on your role and what your role is with that insight. What could be a really valuable insight for our media partners to optimize our campaign is essential to them and what they're doing every day, but may not have a ton of application across other channels. So I think it's really making sure that we're looking at our data with multiple lenses. So how do we make our campaigns better today? And then how are we learning from what we're running right now? How can that apply to what we're going to do next?
Well, this is a tee up for you being a data expert. So what's your lens on this and how brand marketers can apply what we're talking about now, like making it actionable insights from data?
And I feel like I'm going to be a broken record if I could say anything. It's time, and I really appreciate what Linda and Chrissy are saying, but it comes back to time. A lot of data right now, especially if there's different third party, it's stagnant, right? But us, to your point, we're different. We're changing, right? And our needs change collectively, and our needs from the medicines that we need change collectively. So the more data that we can bring in that has real-time signals, that can be dynamic, that allows you to be able to then utilize those insights to pivot, to make changes, that to me is such a powerful thing that changes it from data to insights to really the next thing is outcomes, right? Because ultimately, our job as marketers is to get information to patients as quickly as possible. So the more inputs that we have in a timely way to do that just makes it become less even about the insights, but the outcomes that we could drive as a result of that journey, to me, right? So I think time, when we think about it, is there's first party, yes, there's second party data as we continue to strike and see relevant information of what, a publisher, what are they reading, right? Are they going to a migraine site? Or how often are they visiting the store to buy Excedrin, right? Like all of those signals can feed in to ultimately lead to something that drives a better business outcome too.
What do you think, Stephanie?
To build on everything that the panelists have said, I think that it's also just noticing the trends. Like when you're thinking about the insights, yes, there's the data, but then over time, what is that telling us? What optimizations do we have to work with our agency partners to make to then either to further improve and enhance performance? Or where do we have to perhaps make certain cuts on partners that aren't pulling their weight? So I think, and or even definitions of our audiences. We don't just go in with, oh, here's our one audience segment, and we're going to put all our eggs in one basket. We're going to dynamically build multiple audiences and test and learn and optimize that way through the real-time data signals that Lisa's talking about. So then, we can further enhance those outcomes.
What do you think?
Me taking you from the brand and the creative perspective, going back to what Christy was saying, it's all about the story. Data it's a bunch of numbers. Until we can put the insights and our experiences and our thoughts for each of these different channels, what our expectations of the channels are, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and what does that weave together for your brand. So you could even see something like an ROI go down on something, but because you've been investing further in that channel, you're maximizing that channel. So it doesn't mean that it's bad, but that might mean that something else is pulling more of its weight, or you're underfunding in something else. So understanding how each of the different data points, your audience, everything, it could be down to even creative wear out. There are a lot of things that impact those numbers, and looking at it from a holistic perspective with expectations and concrete goals in mind helps you build that story that ultimately you can communicate up to your leadership and define what is good for what your brand is doing, or brands.
Yes. Awesome, thank you. So let's go a little bit into, just make what's popping in my head. I think we should talk about it. We talked about it when we prepped as well. It's so how is precision marketing, addressable audiences, and the technology being used to drive business impact? And specifically, we're thinking about like the new way people are consuming we'll call it TV as a broad umbrella, but we know that's so different between CTV, OTT, et cetera, and that's showing up a lot in how we can market and precisely target in an addressable way. So I love each person's perspective on that. We'll go in reverse again, so Sarah, you're in the hot seat.
No problem. I think about it whenever I end up talking about TV, there's inevitably 17 different conversations about, well, what is TV? Do I get to it this way? Do I get to it that way? What if it's on my phone? Is that TV? Is that AVOD or SVOD? What are all these acronyms mean? And ultimately, it doesn't matter. That's for us, for the brands and the media partners to understand as a consumer, because we're all consumers. We just want to see our shows. We want to be able to watch, the next episode of The Bear or, whatever, and it's getting your content to your audience. So it's the duck underwater. There's a lot going on, and, just making sure that the right audience for your brand, you're getting to them. It could be through addressable, it could be through linear, it could be through CTV, different buying modalities. Do you want to invest in some of those more high impact units to gain further interest, to get more direct contact with your customers to your own consumer properties? It's that evolution.
What are you seeing with regards to CTV, OTT, the new TV, if you will?
Well, I work on a lot of brands that have very specific target audiences. So going into linear can be viewed as a waste of money potentially. Sure. So really leveraging CTV and OLV and those channels via those third-party audiences or even first-party data that we're able to then use with our partners like DeepIntent and others in the industry are really helping us get to our right patient types. So sometimes we might have, and I know we talked about this earlier, we'll have internal stakeholders say, I never saw our ad. Well, you're not supposed to see our ad. It's not targeted to you unless you have this disease state. So I think that we are starting to see, though, a lot of that strong performance with the CTV channel as a result of these these different data sets that we're leveraging to target the right patient populations.
Yeah, I'm laughing because when I did rare disease for Oxbryta, and we could target specific to those diagnosed with sickle cell, and people are like, I never see the ad. I'm like, I don't see the ad. I'm not in the the target audience, whatever.
Right.
And people didn't understand that. And also, like when we came into Pfizer from Global Blood Therapeutics, is people also internally were shocked. They're like, you're doing TV? How are you doing TV? Like, I'm like, we're not doing demo-based buys here. We're literally reaching the audience where they engage with the content, and that's across different screens and platforms and whatnot. And we were doing it with efficiently with our budget for sure. So it looked bigger in the community, if you will, but it's just being much smarter with the technology that's allowing us to reach who we want to engage with. So what's your take, Lisa? What do you think?
I think the exciting part is that all of these mediums that we're talking about can be bought now in a single platform. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. And what that means, not only is it more addressable, you can get more data, more insights, but then also you can really also manage for incrementality, right? Like, how do you drive back efficiency? How do you frequency cap? Because when you have it in a single platform, it allows you to then manage the buys in a way that can talk about the incremental reach, right? Linear, mass reach, a lot of waste, right? So then the more precise that we can get, and we marry that with different mediums where people are consuming in a single platform, it becomes a really interesting story of not just about how to make it more addressable, but how to make it more efficient, right? And then how do you drive even better measurement? Because then you could tie some of that incrementality to, again, outcomes and metrics that really matter. Like, hey, that incrementality drove X amount more, RX, right? Because I reached X amount more patients. Like, there's just so much more opportunity that allows you, when you've got that single point of visibility, particularly in platforms, that can drive the optimizations and utilize the different tools to control for it.
It's interesting too, Christy, I'm going to share a little something we talked about this morning, if that's okay. So we were talking about like how people may have engaged if they watched the debate last night, right? Hometown plug for Philadelphia. And so what's interesting is everyone watches differently, so what they think is TV. So Chrissy had mentioned that she watched on like YouTube TV, and I was like literally like jaw on the floor. I'm like, well, you did? What? Like crazy. So like, tell us a little about your
It was
the
actually,
way you came to
it was
that.
just YouTube, and truthfully, I was cleaning up around the house, and I was getting ready to turn the debate on the television, and I had been on YouTube, and a notification came up to start streaming live on ABC on YouTube, and I was like, this is wonderful, I can keep doing what I was doing and start tuning into the pre-debate. But I think the fragmentation that we're talking about, you can look at it like a hurdle, but with that also comes a lot of opportunity. So it comes with the opportunity of being more precise. It comes with the opportunity of being more targeted and leveraging advanced audiences to still reach our patients with a video asset, which was a barrier, 10, 15 years ago for a lot of brands who didn't have a linear TV budget or couldn't justify that budget because of the amount of waste that would be generated. So I think it just gives a lot more opportunity today to really make our plans a bit more smarter and targeted.
Yeah. Even though it's not part of this main component now, but it's also thinking at the front end when you're developing creative and that content's not just, ooh, it's TV ad. Yes, we all go do a shoot, but when you're at the shoot, you have to think about like, do we get the interviews with patient testimonials? We're going to use that in a different format. This is for the website, like doing still photography. There's like so many different elements. If you're thinking macro at the front end, when you get down to the regulatory review, you're like, oh, we're ready for screen, platform, place, unit length, music, all that, voiceover, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I think, and if you think it has come to an end and we are at the end goal, we're not. I had the pleasure of taking my family to the beach a few weeks ago and watching my children not understand what linear television was and not know that they couldn't select their program and that they had to sit through this commercial break. So we're going to head into a Gen Alpha that is not cord cutters. They're going to be cord nevers, and that may be a little bit of a ways down the road, but it'll be here before you know it.
I give you my parenting skills later. With my kids are much older now, but I remember when they were a little bit younger, we would put them on digital detax. I'm like, you have to live like it's 1985. You can watch TV, but only with this remote and these 3 stations. They're like, what? Like they melt down. But anyway, what's your take?
Well, I was
on
just
this?
thinking, again, optimistically about how the options give you the ability to finally become much more personalized in the communications. And while that puts a more burden on the creative challenge in terms of really having that modular content available, again, with the right identity solution, with the right technology, with the right media partners, you have the opportunity to really dynamically serve up and deliver your message in a very personal way. And that goes all the way to the channel that they're absorbing media through. So again, it's just an evaluation of the technology and how everything is coming together. And fortunately, there's experts out there that can help with that. It's just, I would encourage looking at it as the glass is half full. It's a very wonderful time, and a time when your media dollars and your media planning can be so much more precise, as well as the creative being delivered to that ultimate patient.
It's not a Stanley water bottle. Times have changed. I'm kidding. Okay. Why don't we pivot a little bit, because we're touching on this, and it's making me think we should go into a little bit more about, we're hearing a lot of buzzwords right now, not that they're buzzwords, but more like storytelling, journeys and whatnot. So I think creative storytelling is key, and this kind of ties in with like creative development, the targeting, all of this stuff. And I think some of the discussions we've had as a group were around, the technological disruption is one thing. We also see the consumer media consumption habits is another. And then throw in creative storytelling. That's a pretty complex, role to play, where you're now creating content that lives in not 3 places, it's not just TV, print, radio, or whatever. Like, it lives in a lot of places in a lot of different shapes and form, and it cannot be matching luggage. It has to have unique for platform, screen, relevancy, I remember working with someone and they thought like they could be on TikTok without video. I'm like, it's a video-based platform. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So what are you all seeing in terms of how you tell your brand, this is more for our manufacturer side of the business here, is how you tell your brand story differently today because of the changing media landscape and the changes that consumers have in their media choices. So why don't we start with you being our creative expert in your background?
There's so much more video today than there was even 5 years ago. Video is pervasive across almost every channel. There's a screen on everything. So as you're going into that creative exploration, you're thinking about how to utilize video there, but it's not just how do you utilize video, but what's the style of the video and how do you stay true to your brand? Do you want a more UGC type of user-generated content view for some more social media, but you want a more holistic patient testimonial for some of your own properties? So how do you stay true to your brand, but how do you serve the needs of your audience? How do they want to consume your content? So understanding that and keeping both of those things as kind of your directional key points, and then layering on all of the data, because you might be reaching different groups of your audience in different channels. Some where you might be reaching some of your younger demographic might be on some more of the social channels or the CTV side of things, whereas you might need to go addressable linear to reach some of those older audiences that maybe still are accessing their TV through what we would consider antiquated ways today, like cable and dish and things like that. But it's marrying those two things and understanding what each of those platforms can do and understanding what you need to communicate when and how.
My nerd alert meter's going off, and I'm like, audience segmentation, what have you. So what are you seeing, Stephanie, in terms of this in storytelling and how you're approaching things different with the group that you work at Sanofi?
So I think to your point of bringing up segmentation and yours as well, when you're building out that creative and building out that creative by those different segments or ensuring that you have something to deliver to that person, I think there's also the I see me in the creative too, that's really important. If you're serving an ad for, say, a diabetes product, seeing a white woman on a beach isn't necessarily going to resonate with other people from other ethnicities because they don't see them in the creative. So I think also understanding your audience and making sure that all people from all walks of life are being represented in the creative that you're developing as well, I think is really important to that.
Yeah, I worked on something where we had like a cultural representative that helped with authentic, when we were doing a TV commercial shoot and some other content, and we had to make sure like the hairstyles were accurate and things of that nature. But I also was like, hey, like people are in the community, they understand authentically how they show up. They usually don't need to be told, but in some cases in this industry, you have to also make sure that lens is being actually accurately represented. And then the opportunities to engage with that audience differently, because like you said, like being seen, being heard, and being represented would resonate potentially better in the back end data for sure, and credibility as well. So Lisa, as much as I want to ask you, I'm going to jump to Chrissy.
Well, the one thing I would just say, and I
Or not.
I'm not here to say that I plan a bunch of creative and media plans, but I want to call out, and you guys brought up the points, this is when data and insights does become really important, even in creative, right? So how do we bring creative and media closer together in the conversations, and how does insights bridge that? And so I'm not gonna try to say I plan creative. I don't work at a manufacturer, but what I can do, and what we should be doing, is thinking of the bridge that insights can ultimately have you better information about how to reach your audiences and understand your audiences and help inform the places that you're going to be running across all the different mediums. So I had to slip that in there because I'm bridging between the two of them.
We were originally going to mute mics, just kidding.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so what do you think, Chrissy, in terms of segmentation, creative, and planning for this new dynamic place? What are you seeing?
I think at this point we have to look at having platform specific and platform optimized creative as table stakes. So
For sure.
you
I agree.
cannot be repurposing a TV spot onto your social platforms and expect that to do well in today's world. With that comes creative strain. That becomes a lot of creative resources that are needed to keep up with this media landscape and all the platforms we want to be on, coupled with the fact that wear out happens faster than ever. That's kind of a constant churn. I think that kind of bridges the other buzzword in the category, which is generative AI, which may have less application in the traditional media sense, which has a strong legacy of predictive AI. But how do we leverage generative AI to scale our creative resources and our creative efforts and put those resources, those human resources, to the best use, and really help us generate more content? As Pharma, I think that that's something that's always going to be a challenge, to stay current, to feel real time, but it's the expectation anymore. Feeling stale or not authentic to your platform is just not going to resonate.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think we're seeing more of that. I know at Pfizer that in terms of there's different places when leveraging generative AI or AI in the creative process, including ad copy development, and the systems are like you're educating the system, right? So what you're putting in is preparing different guardrails, rules, and whatnot, so the output comes out. And then, of course, a human still would look at the sample creatives, but we're able to look across our enterprise, Pfizer, across the enterprise, all the creative that's happening, ad copy with specific business rules and requirements, and get outputs that allow us to figure out which is performing best and which platforms for which audience, and then inform creative. That may not be happening on every single brand, but it's something that we've been doing, we're probably going to start to see more and more about. So I think we'll start to lose the buzz of everyone talking about like what's Gen I, and actually seeing it put into practice, even if it's like baby steps, priming the group.
But when you multiply your platform-specific creative needs times now also the expectation of personalization, that's where we have to get to tech solutions that are going to help us not only deliver that message, but help customize that and be predictive in that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one of the things that also, I want to touch on this too, as a little bit of a pivot in our storytelling, because this came up a lot. It also ties in for me a little bit with targeting. It's not my favorite word in pharma, is is the personalization and seeing patients as people, right? And so where I mentioned targets, like they're not targets. Targets things you shoot at usually, right? And so how do we engage these audience in this healthcare lens creatively that resonates with them at the right moment, the right time, the right screen, or multiple screens? You know, that's a high order and task to ask of any brand marketer, whether you have like deep pockets or not. There's never like, the pockets are never deep enough, right? Especially from a creative standpoint. So what are your thoughts about that? About like, I think it was Amazon had a book years ago about like keeping the customer in the room, right? So like, how do we keep that patient and always think about them? Like when I used to do different brand work on the brand side, I'd always pretend there was an empty chair in the room and say, that's the customer. What does that person's needs want? Not what I want, someone else wants, leadership wants. What's your take on that in terms of storytelling in this new world? Because you brought up, I think it was you, Chrissy, brought up like, it's not one size fits all. You can't put your TV commercial on like Facebook or Meta or whatever, right? Like you have to really think about that audience and what are they doing in that brief moment we get with them, if we even get it at all. What's your take? Start with you, Linda.
Well, again, I think leaning on the technology to be able to really help that. You know, one of the things we say is that a relationship doesn't begin with just one conversation. A relationship begins by carrying that first conversation into many forward conversations, carrying forward the learning, carrying forward the connections that you're building time and time again. And so having the resource, the technology, the data resource in order to capture how that individual is evolving over the course of time, how they're learning about your brand, what content they're absorbing, and what their new concerns might be, or interests are, or symptoms that they're experiencing, and being able to capture that and in real time be able to react to that and serve up the right creative at the right channel at the right time is a very, very difficult task. But the good news is that there are services out there and there's technology to help manage all of that. You see that as consumers, you see that in other retail and you know, in entertainment, you know, type verticals. So it's being done today, and it can easily be transferred into healthcare and delivered for your audiences.
What do you think? I know you've talked about what you think, but like, want to elaborate a little more too? What
Yeah,
do you think
I agree with everything you said. I'm going to take a slightly different spin on it in the sense of how do we make sure the patient stays relevant in all of our conversation and efforts. We all have patient journeys that we're looking at. We all see the barriers that patients face on a slide, on your brand planning documents. I think you can't underestimate the value in actually hearing a real patient testimonial. I spent a good portion of my career on the agency side before coming to AstraZeneca, and making sure that our agency partners and all of our teams get access to that, hearing first party from a patient what their challenges were, what they experienced, I think can be easily missed because we're giving you that information on a piece of paper, but I think it's not quite the same. So I think making sure we all hear those real patient voices makes it a lot easier to keep that.
Totally agree, and a shameless plug for anyone in brand marketing to ride-alongs with your field force, because when you are sitting and seeing the conversations either with patients in a waiting room or in the actual where care is delivered, if you will, it is of course you're a fly on the wall, but it is mind-blowing, and you have a greater appreciation. I also recommend seeing different geographies, because what you might see like in certain neighborhoods in Philadelphia and go drive 10 miles south, it could be a different experience patient and everything, and the same message is not going to be like applicable in 10 miles difference if you're like literally micro targeting, if you will.
Another challenge.
Sorry, I was coughing so much. This actually reminds me of something that we were talking about before. Patients are people. Like, we don't just read about medical information when we're not feeling well, right? Yep. Providers don't just go to the site about the drug. There's all these other moments that happen throughout the day. We've talked a lot about it and all the different screens and all the different places. That's all signals, that's all data. That all helps us better understand what are the places that they're most likely to engage and how to put that together. So when I think about it, it's, again, I know I keep saying the same thing, but to me it rings true. Pulling all of that in to better understand and have a more robust profile, that's some of the stuff we do even with Upsilon, right? All the different places, like I'm not just a mom. I'm a mom that loves to garden and all the different things that are important
Different
to me.
uniforms.
And when I might be more likely to engage might not be in a medical site. It might be in a place where I'm in a more relaxed moment or I'm more open to learning more. So how do we pull that in? But more importantly, then optimize off of that data and then provide back insights so that we create more of a closed loop in these platforms to be able to make the decisions to, again, what we're here to do, which is give them relevant information, help them better understand what their choice is and how to help ultimately their health.
Stephanie, what do you think?
So I think that everyone has had very good points, and to build on that, it's also thinking about there's the patient journey, and then there's also how do you tie that back to the physician and build that red thread throughout, and then even tie it back to what else other things are your brand teams doing. Media can only do so much, but then we're going to drive them to something. What other resources and how can you create, is your brand team creating, or how are you creating that overall omni-channel experience from what the field does, the HCP, to the patient conversation, and building that surround sound effect.
That full, we always hear closed loop marketing or whatever, like the full picture, but I totally agree with you. So we're going to end with your comments. So what do you think? I keep calling you the creative expert. I know you do more than just creative, but if you could share your lens on that patient personalization and any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's really trying to understand, and I completely agree with both the understanding the patient testimonials and hearing directly from patients and different patients, and going out into, with the ride-alongs with your sales force and things like that, you do gain so much information and understanding and empathy from experiencing everything firsthand and taking that back and marrying it with all the data that we see, understanding what we're trying to communicate, what our goals are, and trying to craft this message that serves the patient where they're at, what they're expecting to see within each channel, how they work together, and ultimately bring them along so that they have the information to make meaningful decisions about their life. I think we're all here trying to improve patients' lives, and we're all trying to serve that same puzzle, and whether it's media levers or brand storytelling ways, and it's putting that mix together that's right for your brand at that time in that landscape of the market so that patients can ultimately have a better tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, thank you so much, everyone. And I want to thank the entire panel for your awesome insights and participation. Thank you.